Hello, it's Martin from Wisely Automotive and I'm here today with the BMW i8. Quite a unique car and not something we usually deal with, being EV retailers, but it is a plug-in hybrid and we do love them. So I thought I would take you on a tour of the i8 and how to get the most out of the plug-in hybrid drivetrain, because it's quite a unique setup with an electric motor powering the front wheels and a 1.5 litre engine powering the rear axle through a 6-speed automatic. Plus there's a little motor in the back as well to help out the petrol engine if it needs a bit more torque. This one is plugged into our Hypervolt charger, but you can use a 3-pin domestic socket as well, and it has literally just finished charging. But now let's actually get into how to make this work well in the real world. Let's say you are getting ready to leave your house and it's a particularly chilly day, like it actually is today. Well, this particular example comes with the fancy display key from BMW, but even without the key, you can remotely start the cabin heating or air conditioning, depending on the ambient temperature. My preferred solution is using the phone, because not only can you precondition from there, you can see where the car is located, you can see how much electric and petrol range you have left, and so on. If we peek inside, you can see that on the air conditioning panel there is a flashing fan icon, and that's what signifies that the HVAC system is working, and in fact if I feel over the vents that the heat is definitely coming out. The important thing to mention is that all of this can happen while the vehicle is locked, and given it's still plugged in, it will use the power from the wall to run the electric heater instead of wasting battery, which means you can still set off with a full battery and a nicely warmed up cabin. Obviously the engine in the back stays off, so you will not hear your neighbors complaining that you are polluting your area. It has been a few minutes, the cabin is nice and toasty, so let's unplug and get going. The vehicle needs to be unlocked for the charging to stop and the cable to be released. Now I just need to lower myself in elegantly and we are ready to go. Pretty normal car stuff. Start-stop button to turn the vehicle on, but it defaults to starting in electric mode, and as you can hear it's fairly quiet in here and the engine will not kick in. We know that we are on because it says ready in the instrument cluster, but to set off I will use the maximum e-drive mode. So just under the start-stop button you have got a switch where you can enable maximum e-drive. Now that will technically speaking limit your top performance, but the car will try to behave as an electric car as much as possible and only kick in the combustion engine when absolutely necessary for performance and safety reasons if you floor the accelerator pedal. So I've just reset all the trip meters so we can measure how much range you realistically get on a charge out of these i8s. Important thing to mention, this is the facelift model, which means you get a slightly bigger battery pack than the previous versions, and you also have the upgraded BMW head unit. Other than that they look pretty similar and the drivetrain has by and large remained unchanged. The vehicle always defaults to starting in comfort mode, and that's what I'm going to leave it in. And speaking of which, I will turn on the ventilation system to get some heat into the cabin at 20 degrees Celsius and set to automatic mode. Now I just have to endure driving the i8. I definitely didn't come up with this video idea just to drive the i8, because I have to say it does feel pretty special. It launched on the market in, I believe it was 2014, 2015, something like that. Obviously they've made the one facelift as I mentioned before, but since then nothing else like it has come around, and to be fair they haven't sold in great numbers when they were brand new, so I don't think BMW would re-attempt it again, but that means that they are very, very sought after on the used market. It's one of the few modern cars where we can actually see the value hold up or even go up year on year. In terms of the driving experience there is not much to comment on. While it's in electric mode, it behaves like an electric car. Smooth, quiet, refined, all the things you want when you drive it just as a daily, to the shops, dropping off kids to school and so on. The kids, I'm afraid they will have to be very short because it is technically speaking a 2+2, but those rear seats really are only emergency seats. I wouldn't want to be squished in there as an adult. But yeah, over the bumps it handles perfectly well. It doesn't bottom out over speed bumps, even some of the big ones we have in London. And the visibility for such a low quite exotic looking car from the outside, it's quite good. So I don't really see any problems with that. The controls are nice and light, especially in comfort mode. You can definitely tell that it was tuned for both kind of the fun stuff and also everyday usability. And this is where I think plug-in hybrids absolutely shine, because it feels like you're getting two cars in one. Yes, it can be really fun on the twisty roads, and we will test it out as well, don't you worry. But also day to day, it's comfortable. Even on these big wheels, it almost feels like a GT car. Yes, you can feel the bumps, but it's never crashy or anything like that. And it has quite a long wheelbase, so it filters out the imperfections quite well for being a very low sporty vehicle. We are also consistently impressed by the build quality, because even though this one has done about 23,000 miles, so it's a low mileage example, low owners, we only stick to the low owner ones, we don't want any kind of bastardized cars. It's absolutely solid, there's not a single squeak or rattle in the cabin. Unlike the BMW i3, which is a little city full electric car, this is tuned a bit differently in terms of the controls. So the i3 by default, when you let off the accelerator pedal, it slows down quite aggressively using the electric motor, and it doesn't creep on its own. So when you let go of the brake, it stays still. This is a bit more familiar, like a normal automatic car. Even in the full electric mode, if I let go of the brake pedal, it starts kind of inching forward on its own. And likewise, if I'm driving and coming up to an intersection, if I let go of the accelerator pedal, it basically keeps on coasting. There's a little bit of regen, but not much. I'll have to go left here. I don't really know the area, but this example is specified with the head-up display, so that's how I'm following the directions without getting interrupted by the annunciator lady. And I'm afraid, given how centrally located we are in London, most of the roads around us are about 20 miles per hour. So that's what I'm doing. We will get out onto the more open roads in just a second. But this is realistically, well, the electric drivetrain really comes into its own. There's no need to run a combustion engine just to poodle along. What is interesting and different to full electric cars is that, unlike most of them, pretty much all of them other than the Taycan, there is a 2-speed gearbox on the front axle. So the motor is putting the power down through a 2-speed box. You can't really feel it shifting in driving conditions like this. The reasoning behind it is that BMW put it in to make sure that the electric motor can provide enough torque even at higher speeds. So don't feel like you only have a 1.5 litre engine. Once you kind of exceed the city limits, it will still chirp in to get you off the line, help with overtakes and so on. But there's absolutely no way to control how that gearbox behaves. It's its own automatic logic, and the computer decides everything. There are paddle shifters behind the wheel, but they are the ones which control the 6-speed automatic, which is mounted to the 1.5 litre petrol. If we take this moment to go into the trip computer, you will see that so far we have averaged 2.1 miles per kilowatt hour. I'm sure that will improve a little bit as we start covering more miles, because this is literally from the start. But the fuel economy is 99.9 miles per gallon. Obviously it can't read over 100, and we haven't used any fuel. The petrol engine hasn't kicked in yet. This is the important thing with some plug-in hybrids, for example the Kia products, which I know this is not comparable at all to, but they do not have an electric heater. So in the winter, they still have to run the engine to warm up and to run the cabin heating. Whereas with the i8, it's done properly. It does have an electric heater. The air conditioning compressor is also run from the high voltage battery. So regardless of how much comfort you want to have in the cabin, it can stay in full electric mode, obviously with the only sacrifice being your electric driving range. But honestly, considering it's about 9 degrees outside, the 2 miles per kilowatt hour is not a bad number, at least for this kind of car. And as you can see, we are still at 87.5%. So I will catch up with you as the battery depletes. I just pulled up to the Richmond Golf Club, and let's look at the stats. By the way, the flickering, that's only because it's on camera. You can't see it in the real world. And let's move into the trip computer. So as suspected, the efficiency has improved to 2.8 miles per kilowatt hour, and you can see the petrol engine hasn't kicked in at all. I'm afraid very low average speed because London. If we look at the instrument cluster, you can see that the car is still happy to remain in the fully electric mode, but we don't have much battery left. That's the battery gauge, 4 miles, and that little arrow, that symbolizes when the petrol engine will kick in. Because the battery will never drain quite to zero, it will always leave a little bit left just so it can crawl in traffic in battery mode and coast down hills, for example. In the middle screen you can see the exact percentage, so we are down to 29% and we have covered about 18 miles. So proof, just as I mentioned in the beginning of the video, you can expect realistically between 20, 25 to maximum 30 miles of range depending on how you drive and the conditions. Which is a good point to mention what happens when you completely run out of the battery. As you can see, so far the vehicle is reporting 99.99 miles per gallon, which is simply unrealistic. And if you look at the spec sheet and the brochure, the manufacturers for all plug-in hybrids love to give very high, unachievable MPG figures. And they are not lying, the reason being the way they are tested is on a test cycle where they start with a full 100% charge in the battery, and only some bits of the test are done using the combustion engine. So of course the numbers look very optimistic. But what I will do now is continue driving at still quite low-ish city speeds, nothing like motorways or anything like that. And hopefully we can test out what MPG you can actually expect on a daily basis. As mentioned, up until now I've been in the max e-drive mode, but I will take that off now and let the computer decide when to use electricity, when to use petrol. This works even when there is quite a bit of charge in the battery, and it works best when you have a route set in the built-in sat-nav system, which is what I've done. Because then the hybrid drivetrain knows when best to use the electricity, like for example at low town speeds, whereas if you jump on the motorway or country roads, it will prioritize running the engine where it's already quite efficient if you are holding just constant revs. And as you can see, even though we still have about 3 miles in the battery, as I pulled away onto the A3, the petrol engine kicked in, and in fact it is still humming away in the background. So just to make clear sense of it, let me go into the trip computer and reset the values so we can measure how we do on this leg of the journey. And let me tell you, when that petrol engine wakes up, it completely transforms the character of the i3. You go from this eco-conscious, comfortable daily cruiser into a proper sports car, because it never hesitates, it's happy to hold revs, even in comfort mode, and there is no significant delay between you putting your foot down and the car actually starting to go. Obviously the electric motor can do a lot of the work of filling the gaps while the petrol engine wakes up, so that's again one of the benefits of a hybrid drivetrain. But now as we are coasting to a stop, as I lightly touch the brake pedal, we are actually recharging the battery using the regenerative braking. So the motor on the front axle acts as a generator, and that puts a little bit of charge back in the battery. If you want to monitor more of that, you can go into the dedicated e-drive menu, and you can see that the car is very clever. So it knows that we are going to go downhill, so it's preparing for recapturing energy because of the topography of the route set up in the sat-nav system. And you can see that now we were charging using the front motor, and at the moment as the ground has leveled out, we are driving but on electricity only so far. By the way, this whole charging and driving and switching off the different modes, etc., it's all very transparent to the user. Me as a driver, I can't really feel anything. It drives like normal automatic. It's just that if I, for example, like right now, gently touch the brake pedal, it's the computer deciding how much to brake using the electric motor and how much to use the actual physical friction brakes. Some lower-end hybrids can struggle with this because you can feel the transition from the electric motor braking into the physical braking, but here it's really, really well done. I mean, it's a BMW. BMW knows how to tune these driver-focused things. And that's it, the engine has officially kicked in. If I'm going down a hill, the electric motor helps recoup some of the energy and coast. But for normal driving now at 50 miles per hour on the A3, it's the engine powering the rear axle. And I'm in standstill traffic. But this is where the electricity makes sense, because the engine can now shut off and I will just crawl along using the battery. Even though it says it's discharged and it only has 1 mile of range, it's happy to do these low speeds on electricity alone. That took forever, but I'm back to normal speeds. By default, what the computer likes doing is setting off in electric mode to about 10 miles per hour, and once you've got a bit of momentum, then it blends in the petrol engine. So for example, now at a roundabout, it's waiting in electric mode, but if you need to go, it will go. You may be wondering whether this is good for the engine to keep starting and stopping, but it's in fact the second electric motor which lives in the back that acts as a starter as well. So it's much more beefed up compared to a normal 12-volt starter motor. And secondly, it does actually make sense, because you will see I've had a glance at the fuel economy and I still have a few miles to go just to simulate a real journey, but the numbers look very, very impressive so far. So keep watching to find out. On the second leg, the traffic after the initial A3 build-up freed up. It was a lot more fluid, easygoing, but the numbers speak for themselves and they are impressive. Because if we go into the trip computer, you will see that the vehicle has averaged over 48 miles per gallon. Keep in mind, with an empty battery. And that's what we would say we realistically see on these, between 40 to 50, maybe up to 60 miles per gallon if you really try hard, but in mixed use, about 40 to 50 miles per gallon. Admittedly, that was all done with pretty low average speeds. You see now about 18 miles per hour. So let's see how it does at motorway speeds at 70 miles per hour. By the way, just for the record, I would say don't bother using any motorway chargers. Most importantly, these IMT ones are the rapid chargers, and the plug will not even fit into the i8. The reason being the i8 really is designed to be kind of charged overnight or when you are staying somewhere for hours on end. This is called a Type 2 plug, and it doesn't support rapid charging. So think residential parking. If you do not have off-street parking, you can utilize the lamppost chargers in London, but it's the easiest thing to recharge at home while you're sleeping and the car is on the driveway. If you're out and about, just refill with petrol and keep going. Rejoined the M25, so let's see. 70 miles per hour where possible. The traffic is quite dense. It's Friday afternoon, people are trying to get home. The car is in the auto e-drive mode, and yeah, I will just cruise along. It's a bit loud in here because the road surface on the M25 is absolutely terrible. There's these concrete panels, but comfort-wise, it's totally fine. And we're back in traffic. That didn't last long. But so far the values are 43 miles per gallon. I've seen that as we got up to 70, and at steady 70 it's about 35-ish miles per gallon, which is reasonable. Obviously the electrics are not helping much at that point. The car is still quite aerodynamic and it has an efficient engine. The engine is literally taken straight out of a Mini Cooper. So yeah, just have realistic expectations. It's nothing magical, it can't bend the rules of physics, but perfectly reasonable for how much horsepower this car has. I take everything back. When the traffic eventually freed up, I managed to stay at 70 miles per hour for a few miles, and obviously you need to take elevation, wind speed into account and everything, but this time around managed to get 51.4 miles per gallon with an average speed of about 68, 69 miles per hour. So really not bad, and the point I'm trying to make is that this is not a scientific test, but at least I can show you what kind of numbers you can expect. That's it, got back, the car pulled in silently on electric mode because I had the sat-nav set up, and it always tries to get you home on electricity. Now, don't think it's all about efficiency, because the moment you flick the gear selector into sport mode, as you can hear, the engine kicks in and it will stay on in an effort to provide power into the battery. So even if you have low state of charge, it will keep charging the battery up to about 50% to make sure that there's always enough buffer for the motor to be deployed in combination with the engine for maximum performance. As mentioned earlier, you can also use the paddle shifters to go into manual shifting mode, and this is quite difficult to show on camera, but the heads-up display goes into the same style as on proper M cars, where it shows you the selected gear and the rev gauge. If you push it, it will be quick, but the efficiency will definitely suffer. I did take it on some twisty roads on the way back to the office, and the efficiency dropped from 40 MPG all the way down to the mid-teens. So realistically, expect somewhere between 10 and 20 MPG if you really step on it. I think that's most of the drivetrain bits covered, but now this example is officially ready for sale. As I mentioned in the beginning of the video, we only rarely stock i8s because it's very difficult to come by nice examples in terms of bodywork, low mileage, low owner count, because we don't like cars which have been messed with and extensively modified. Also, obviously, service history with this one having a petrol engine is quite important, unlike on some other EVs. I think that's about it. There will be more content coming on i8s in general, so make sure to subscribe if you don't want to miss that. And if you want even more performance and a full electric car, make sure to check out this video where we show the Model 3 being trashed around the track. Thank you again for watching. See you in the next one.